Research is hard, but your tools should not be. Subthesis.com is the free alternative to expensive software. Whether you need to calculate Chromebox alpha or organize your field notes, Subthesis has a tool for it. No paywalls and no registration required. Check the link in the description and let's dive into today's lesson. Welcome to this comprehensive masterclass on crafting AI personas for large language models. Over the next 30 minutes, we will explore the sophisticated engineering of personas, fundamentally transforming how you think about and interact with AI systems. The transition of LLMs from general-purpose tools to highly specialized reasoning agents hinges primarily on how we engineer these personas. This is not about simple role-playing or creative writing exercises that treat the AI as an actor. It is about understanding the deep mechanics of how language models process and respond to identity-based prompts at a technical level. The stakes of getting this right are significant and growing every day. A well-engineered persona can transform a generic chatbot into a domain expert, a patient tutor, or a strategic advisor capable of nuanced reasoning. A poorly designed one can introduce harmful biases, frustrating inconsistencies, and even serious safety vulnerabilities that undermine user trust. By the end of this session, you will have a complete framework for building high-fidelity AI personas that deliver consistent, expert-level outputs across diverse applications. You will understand the theoretical foundations rooted in cognitive science and machine learning, the practical implementation techniques that professionals use, and the ethical considerations that separate amateur prompting from professional persona engineering. Let us begin this journey into the architecture of artificial identity together. Let us begin by dismantling a common misconception that clouds most discussions about AI personas and leads practitioners astray. An AI persona is not a conscious entity adopting a role. The model does not think of itself as a teacher or an expert in any meaningful sense. Instead, a persona is a mechanism for conditioning the model's latent space to prioritize specific subsets of training data during generation. Think of it as a high-dimensional filter that sits between the prompt and the model's vast repository of learned patterns, selectively activating certain pathways while suppressing others. Research into decoder-only transformer models reveals fascinating architectural details. Concepts associated with personality such as agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, or specific ethical frameworks like utilitarianism versus deontology are not distributed randomly throughout the model's parameters. Instead, they are encoded in distinct regions, typically within the final third of the decoder layers where high-level abstractions emerge. This architectural finding is crucial for understanding why persona prompts work at all. Personality is a high-level abstraction that emerges late in the inference process, building on lower-level linguistic patterns. When you instruct a model to adopt the persona of a libertarian economist, you are effectively steering the activation patterns in these final layers, biasing the token generation toward words and phrases statistically associated with that specific worldview in the training data. The model is not becoming that economist or experiencing their perspective. It is selecting from a subset of its training data that matches the statistical profile of how libertarian economists write and think based on the text it was trained on. This distinction between role-playing and statistical filtering is fundamental to everything that follows in our discussion. The Persona Hub research, which systematically analyzed the impact of 200,000 distinct personas across multiple task domains, demonstrates that assigning an explicit expert role can significantly boost model performance on downstream tasks. This is encouraging news for practitioners seeking better results. However, and this is absolutely critical to understand, this utility is not uniform across all applications and persona choices. A question-aligned persona, meaning one where the persona's expertise directly matches the query domain, like a biologist answering a question about cellular respiration, naturally enhances accuracy and output quality. The model can draw more confidently from the relevant subset of its training data because the persona acts as a precision filter. In contrast, an unaligned persona, or even a generic one where expertise does not match the task, may actually introduce noise and degrade performance compared to using no persona at all. Here is where we encounter the critical insight that separates naive prompting from sophisticated persona engineering. Persona prompting can trigger stereotyping behavior and output inconsistency in ways that surprise users. Because the model's knowledge of any persona is derived entirely from the statistical regularities of its training data, it inevitably inherits the biases, stereotypes, and skewed representations present in that data. A persona defined simply as a cleaner may inadvertently trigger associations with specific demographics, educational backgrounds, or communication styles due to skewed representation in the training corpus. This is the double-edged sword that every persona engineer must understand deeply. Personas focus attention and channel expertise, which is their power, but they also narrow the model's worldview, potentially locking it into biased or myopic reasoning patterns. The same mechanism that makes personas powerful also makes them potentially dangerous when used carelessly or without awareness of these dynamics. The interaction between a user and a persona-driven AI is governed by well-documented psychological principles known as the computers are social actors, or CASA, paradigm. This body of research, dating back decades but increasingly relevant today, demonstrates that users unconsciously apply social rules to computers, treating them as if they were other humans with intentions and personalities. This tendency is dramatically amplified when the AI exhibits a distinct personality through careful persona engineering. The implications for user engagement and trust are profound and practical. Users do not interact with the model architecture when they engage with an AI system. They do not think about transformer layers, attention mechanisms, or probability distributions. They interact with the implied agent, the character that emerges from the persona prompt and manifests through the conversation. When a model is prompted to be empathetic or authoritative, it triggers specific social scripts in the user's mind that shape their expectations and interpretations. Consider a Socratic tutor persona as a concrete example. This single role assignment changes the user's entire expectation framework from getting an answer to being guided toward an answer through carefully designed questions. The user enters a different psychological mode, one of collaborative learning and intellectual discovery rather than simple information retrieval. They become more patient, more reflective, and more engaged with the process. But here is the crucial point that many persona designers miss. If the persona fails to maintain this consistency throughout the conversation, if the tutor suddenly abandons its questioning approach and delivers a direct lecture or answer instead, the illusion breaks instantly. Trust degrades immediately and often cannot be fully recovered. The user feels betrayed or confused, even if they cannot articulate exactly why the interaction feels wrong. The best personas are those that maintain psychological continuity throughout the entire interaction, strictly adhering to the social contract established by their role definition, regardless of what the user does or asks. The PB&J Framework, which stands for Psychology of Behavior and Judgments, represents a significant leap in persona theory. Traditional personas based on demographics, such as 35-year-old male accountant, fail to capture the underlying reasoning behind user judgments. A demographic label is a proxy, not a cause. Knowing someone is 35 tells you almost nothing about why they make specific choices. To construct a high-fidelity persona, incorporate post hoc rationalizations, explanations of why a user holds a specific belief based on their experiences. Here is a concrete example. Instead of defining a persona as simply risk-averse, include the rationale. You are risk-averse regarding technology because you lost significant data during a cloud migration in 2015. That explanatory sentence changes everything. Now the model has a logical engine for the persona's behavior. This rationale scaffolding allows the LLM to predict behaviors in novel situations by applying the underlying logic rather than just matching keywords. The experimental results are conclusive. Personas augmented with behavioral rationales consistently outperform demographics-only personas when predicting user preferences and decision patterns. This shift moves the field from static stock characters to dynamic reasoning agents capable of simulating complex human decision-making. Transitioning from theory to practice, the construction of a robust AI persona requires a systematic engineering approach that goes far beyond creative intuition or casual experimentation. Simply stating act as X is fundamentally insufficient for professional applications that demand consistent, high-quality outputs. Analysis of expert prompting guides across multiple organizations and research institutions reveals a clear consensus on a multi-component architecture that collectively defines the agent's operational boundaries and capabilities. For this lesson, we conceptualize this as the anatomy of a persona comprising four primary pillars that must work together in harmony. The first pillar is identity, which defines the who of the persona through careful role specification, distinctive voice characteristics, and psychological depth. The second pillar is objective, which directs the persona towards specific outcomes through clear task definition and explicit goal articulation. The third pillar is context, which grounds the interaction in a specific reality through audience targeting and scenario framing. The fourth pillar is constraints, which acts as guardrails through explicit limits, prohibitions, and format specifications. Each of these pillars serves a distinct and essential function in the overall architecture, and the best personas address all four comprehensively and thoughtfully. Missing even one pillar creates vulnerabilities that will degrade performance and confuse users. A persona with strong identity but no clear objective is aimless. A persona with clear objectives but no constraints will revert to generic behaviors. Over the next several slides, we will examine each pillar in detail, understanding not just what elements to include, but why each element matters for the model's inference process and the user's experience. The identity pillar defines the who of the persona, but this is precisely where most amateur prompt writers fail spectacularly. They confuse labels with roles, thinking a job title is enough. A job title is merely a label, a word. A role is a function with specific capabilities, limitations, perspectives, and behaviors. The instruction "you are a teacher" is weak and dangerously ambiguous. What kind of teacher? What subject? What grade level? What teaching philosophy? A superior instruction would be, "You are a culturally responsive educator with 15 years of experience teaching in diverse urban schools." This single sentence provides a dramatically stronger steering signal to the model. It tells the model not just to teach, but to prioritize pedagogical strategies that are inclusive and culturally aware, draw on practical classroom experience rather than academic theory, and demonstrate awareness of diverse student needs and backgrounds. It activates a specific subset of the teacher latent space, filtering out generic academic styles in favor of practical, field-tested approaches. Voice and tone form the linguistic interface of the persona through which all communication flows. A persona designed for a principal's newsletter requires a professional, informative, and somewhat formal tone. One designed for fourth graders needs to be kind, supportive, and encouraging with age-appropriate vocabulary. But remember this key insight. Tone is not just about vocabulary selection. It is fundamentally about attitude and relationship. Is the persona authoritative or collaborative, skeptical or enthusiastic, formal or casual? These choices profoundly affect how users perceive and trust the output. Finally, true high-fidelity personas include psychological depth, explicitly defined inner thoughts or specific behavioral traits. Explicitly stating, "You are skeptical of unsupported claims and always ask for evidence," forces the model to adopt a critical stance, actively questioning information rather than passively accepting whatever premise the user provides. The objective pillar directs the persona towards specific outcomes, yet a surprisingly common failure mode in persona design is what I call aimlessness. You create a beautifully defined character with rich identity details who has no clear purpose or direction, like a talented actor with no script standing on stage. Action verbs are the engine of any effective prompt and should be chosen deliberately. Words like create, summarize, draft, analyze, compare, evaluate, and synthesize trigger specific functional modules within the LLM. They tell the model what kind of cognitive operation is expected and what form the output should take. Consider the stark contrast between these two instructions. First, talk about photosynthesis. This is vague and will produce generic, unfocused output that could go anywhere. Second, explain photosynthesis in 3 stages. First, define the process, then demonstrate with a concrete example, then connect to the broader water cycle. This second version provides a structural template for the output. The model knows exactly what to produce and in what sequence, leading to coherent, focused content. But here is the deeper insight that separates good prompts from great ones. Goal clarity is often more important than task definition. Write an email to a client explaining a delayed shipment is a task description. Adding the underlying goal and how the issue will be resolved in a way that retains their business and strengthens the relationship fundamentally transforms the output the model produces. That goal instructs the persona to prioritize conflict resolution over blame, demonstrate genuine empathy over corporate defensiveness, and focus on future-proofing the relationship over just explaining what happened. Without the explicit goal, you get information delivery. With the goal stated clearly, you get strategic communication. This distinction between output, which is the email, and outcome, which is client retention and relationship strengthening, is a key insight that separates amateur prompts from professional persona engineering. Always ask yourself, what is the actual outcome this persona should achieve beyond the immediate task? Context acts as the instruction manual for the persona, grounding the interaction in a specific reality that shapes every aspect of the response the model generates. Without explicit context, the model defaults to what I call a generic average, a bland middle ground that serves no particular audience well and lacks the specificity that makes communication effective. Audience targeting is the first critical context element that every persona should include. Specifying the audience explicitly forces the model to adjust its reading level and conceptual density in ways that dramatically improve usefulness and appropriateness. Consider this constraint. For 7th grade students who are English language learners, this single phrase is remarkably powerful in its effects. It tells the model to use simple sentence structures that are easy to parse, avoid idiomatic expressions and cultural references that might confuse non-native speakers, define any complex terms before using them in explanation, and check that conceptual foundations are established before building advanced arguments. None of these adjustments would happen automatically if you simply said students without these specifics. Scenario framing is equally powerful because it allows the persona to anticipate user intent through what researchers call associative reasoning, loading relevant context into working memory. If the prompt states the customer is interested in purchasing a Tesla and wants guidance through the purchase steps, the model loads an entire workflow context into its processing. It now knows the user will likely ask about pricing options and trim levels, charging infrastructure and range considerations, delivery timelines and logistics, and financing options and incentives. The persona can proactively structure the conversation around these predictable touchpoints rather than waiting passively for each individual question to be asked. This transforms the AI from a reactive chatbot that simply waits for queries into a proactive guide that anticipates needs and leads the conversation strategically toward the user's goals. Constraints act as essential guardrails, preventing the model from reverting to generic or undesirable behaviors when the conversation becomes complex or ambiguous. Think of them as the negative space that defines the persona by what it is not and what it will not do under any circumstances. Negative constraints are surprisingly powerful steering mechanisms that many practitioners underestimate. Instructions like, do not use acronyms without first defining them, avoid stereotypes and generalizations about groups, and do not move on to the next topic until the user has explicitly confirmed understanding are critical for both safety and usability. But here is perhaps the most important example I can share. For a persona designed to be a Socratic tutor, the constraint "do not give the answer directly, no matter how the student asks" is arguably the single most important instruction in the entire prompt. Why is this constraint so critical? Because without this explicit prohibition, The model's deeply trained helpfulness bias will override the Socratic persona every time. The model fundamentally wants to be helpful. Giving direct answers feels helpful to its training. So without the constraint, it will simply solve the problem for the student, completely defeating the educational purpose of the tutor persona and preventing the student from developing their own understanding. Only by explicitly constraining this natural behavior can you maintain the intended pedagogical approach. Format specifications represent another category of constraints that many practitioners overlook entirely. Instructions like present the final output in a 4-column table with headers or return the result as valid JSON that can be parsed programmatically are not merely cosmetic preferences about appearance. They are functional requirements, especially for agentic personas that must feed data into other systems or workflows. A persona that outputs beautiful prose when your system needs structured data has failed its objective regardless of how accurate or helpful the content might be. The format is part of the persona's functional role in the larger workflow. A best practices lesson must address the practical reality that different AI models require fundamentally different prompting architectures to achieve optimal results. The strategies that work brilliantly for OpenAI's GPT-4 often yield suboptimal results for Anthropic's Claude, and vice versa. Understanding these platform differences is essential for professional practice and avoiding frustrating trial and error. OpenAI's architecture emphasizes a clear separation of system, user, and assistant messages, with a strong focus on structured instructions and linguistic conciseness. Developer messages placed in the system role are architecturally prioritized above user messages in the attention mechanism. This means your persona definition in the system prompt carries significant weight and will generally persist even if users try to override it through their inputs. For GPT-4 and later models, the system prompt should be crisp and purpose-driven, avoiding excessive acknowledgement phrases like, "I understand your request," or "Got it, I will help you with that." Such phrases waste tokens without adding value. Complex personas benefit from having chain-of-thought reasoning embedded directly in system instructions, explicitly separating internal thinking from external speaking. Anthropic's Claude uses a fundamentally different paradigm that practitioners must understand to work effectively with these models. Claude is specifically trained to recognize and meaningfully utilize XML tags to structure its reasoning and responses. Tags like context, instructions, role, and task help the model distinguish clearly between background information, specific instructions, role definitions, and immediate tasks. This structural clarity reduces what we call bleeding, where the model confuses instructions with data or misinterprets the prompt's intent. A unique and powerful feature is the thinking tag, where users can explicitly instruct the persona to think through the problem before answering, allowing planning and reasoning without cluttering the final output seen by users. Unlike the crisp OpenAI style, Claude genuinely benefits from lived-in role descriptions with richer narrative detail, backstory, and character development that would be excessive for GPT models. Moving beyond manual prompt crafting, the most sophisticated personas are increasingly generated from actual behavioral data rather than imagined characteristics. This methodology ensures personas are grounded in observable reality rather than assumptions. The 5-step workflow provides a rigorous framework. First, pre-process by bundling raw user logs, support chats, transaction histories, and reviews into a user packet. Clean this data by removing filler and summarizing into standardized categories like profile information and behavior patterns. Second, extract facts and normalize using the LLM's associative reasoning with strict guardrails. The prompt must instruct the model to state "not stated" if a fact cannot be reliably inferred. Frequent questions about diaper rash implies likely has an infant is valid. Assuming political beliefs is not valid. Third, standardize labels to convert narrative facts into analytics-ready formats like price sensitivity high and channel mobile. Fourth, assemble the persona by synthesizing into both narrative description and structured table. The narrative provides the soul stakeholders relate to. The table provides statistics for analysis. Fifth, audit by using a separate reviewer prompt to check every claim against original data, flagging anything unsupported. No lesson on AI personas can be considered complete without a rigorous examination of the ethical implications that accompany this powerful technique. The double-edged sword metaphor we introduced earlier has very real consequences for users, organizations, and society at large. Research has quantified a troubling trade-off between personalization and safety that practitioners must understand. When LLMs are personalized to specific user identities, their performance and safety compliance can fluctuate in ways that create real-world harms. Utility variance is one dimension of this problem that affects output quality. Assigning certain identities, including specific demographic or cultural backgrounds, was found in controlled studies to correlate with measurably lower performance on reasoning tasks compared to a no-identity baseline condition. This means the model's apparent competence is not static, but is dynamically modulated by the persona it adopts or believes it is interacting with. Safety vulnerabilities represent another dimension with potentially serious consequences. While personalization generally increases safety compliance compared to an unpersonalized baseline, significant variations exist across different identity categories. Models may be substantially more permissive of potentially harmful queries from certain persona types than others, creating inconsistent protection. Occupational bias is particularly well documented in the research literature on AI fairness. Studies comparing LLM-generated persona outputs to actual labor statistics found massive distortions in how professions are represented demographically by default. These are not merely accuracy issues or statistical errors. They are representational harms that can reinforce societal prejudices and stereotypes when AI systems are deployed at scale. Gender bias follows predictable and concerning patterns, with female characters consistently described using communal traits like nurturing and supportive, while male characters receive agentic traits like decisive and authoritative. The practical lesson for practitioners is persona task fit. Only assign a persona when the domain expertise strictly requires it for the task at hand, and audit carefully for unintended biases before deployment. Here is your quick reference checklist for building the perfect persona prompt, synthesized from everything we have covered in this masterclass. These 10 components represent the comprehensive architecture of a high-fidelity prompt that produces consistent professional results. First, AI role. Answer the fundamental question: who is this persona? Define their expertise level, professional voice, and character attributes that will guide all subsequent behavior and responses. Be specific about what kind of expert, not just that they are an expert. Second, task. Specify the concrete job using precise action verbs: create, summarize, draft, analyze, compare, evaluate. Make the expected output type explicit so the model knows what to produce. Third, audience. Define precisely who will receive the output and what their needs are. Be specific about reading level, technical expertise, emotional state, and what they need from this interaction. The same content requires completely different treatment for 7th graders versus corporate executives. Fourth, context. Establish the background situation that grounds the interaction in reality. What has happened before this conversation? What is the scenario? What constraints does the real-world situation impose on possible solutions? Fifth, format. Specify exactly how the output should be structured for your needs. Tables, JSON, bullet points, numbered lists, flowing paragraphs, or specific templates. This is functional, not merely cosmetic. Sixth, constraints. Define the negative space explicitly. What must be avoided? What topics are off limits? What behaviors would violate the persona's character or your requirements? Seventh, include examples providing few-shot samples of the desired style and quality level. Show, do not just tell. Eighth, provide reference material as authoritative data sources to anchor responses in verified facts. Ninth, add clarification instructions directing the persona to ask questions when the request is ambiguous rather than guessing. 10th, include follow-up instruction directing the persona to critique its own work before presenting the final output. The engineering of AI personas has evolved from what was once considered a creative writing exercise or an afterthought into a rigorous technical discipline with its own growing body of research, documented best practices, and emerging professional standards. As models become increasingly agentic, capable of using external tools, browsing the web, executing code, and orchestrating complex multi-step workflows, future systems will likely employ what researchers call dynamic persona generation. In this paradigm, the AI analyzes an incoming query, assesses its requirements, and instantly constructs the optimal persona to solve it, essentially a solver generated by a persona generator, all happening automatically before the user even sees a response. For the practitioner working today, the lesson from our 30 minutes together is clear and actionable. The best persona is not the most creative one with elaborate backstory, not the most elaborate character description with extensive fictional history, but the most structurally sound one that addresses the real requirements of the task. It is built on a foundation of explicit role definition with genuine psychological depth, clear objectives that specify both tasks and underlying goals, grounding context that defines both audience and scenario, and strict constraints that prevent undesirable behaviors and ensure consistency. Beyond structural soundness, the best personas incorporate psychological rationales from the PB&J Framework rather than relying on superficial demographics that trigger stereotypes. They are carefully tailored to the specific architecture of the platform you are deploying on, whether that means crisp, structured instructions for OpenAI models or XML structured narratives with thinking blocks for Claude. And crucially, they are rigorously audited for bias and safety implications before any production deployment. By mastering these components, identity, objective, context, constraints, and ethics, you can unlock the true potential of large language models. You can transform them from generic text generators into precise, expert-level instruments of cognition that serve your specific needs with consistency, reliability, and professional quality. Thank you for your attention throughout this masterclass. Go forth and engineer with intentionality and rigor. Research is hard, but your tools should not be. Subthesis.com is the free alternative to expensive software. Whether you need to calculate Chromebox alpha or organize your field notes, Subthesis has a tool for it. No paywalls and no registration required. Check the link in the description and let's dive into today's lesson.